Okay, so first thing, we need to create our ladder section. So here in Blender, I created a section. It should look something like that. And the reason we're creating just a section is because we want to multiply this section a few times, or as much time as we'd like, to create the ladder procedurally. I have here an array modifier in Blender just to demonstrate this, so I can increase the count number and just create the ladders, creating rungs procedurally and making the ladder higher or lower, right? So we want to copy the same behavior to Unreal Engine. This is why we are creating first just a section. Second thing we need to make sure is that we are centering the pivot in the object center, so we can shift it relatively the same height every time, and we don't get any weird moving of the ladder left or right or to the side. So it's always shooting straight up in the same height amount that we're going to give it, which is going to be the height of the section itself each time. Okay, so I'm going to export this quickly and go to the engine next. Okay, so now we are finally in the engine, and I opened the third-person project here. Nothing changed here. I just imported the ladder from our Blender, and when we open our ladder, you can see that the pivot we are getting is different than the one we have with Blender. Blender, actually, the pivot is here, and in Unreal, the pivot is here. The reason this is happening is because whenever we export an FBX from Blender, it actually uses it takes the world center relative to the object to create its pivot point. So it's overriding our pivot point here. If I wanted to use this pivot point, I should have exported the ladder like this, right? Centering the pivot in the world center. But, and there's some plugins for Blender that can help you export without needing to do that, without changing, just using the pivot you're having the moment you do the export. But anyway, now in Unreal, my pivot is here, but it's quite okay. It's the same thing, because in the end of it, I just need it to be centered around the Z here. So I can just shift it along this axis, and we're going to do it each time the same amount of length depending on the height of this section, right? So everything is set up correctly. So if you get this, it's quite all right, don't worry about it. And now let's start creating the blueprint for our ladder. So I'm right-clicking, and I'm going to blueprint classes here, and I'm creating an actor. This is the most basic of blueprints, and let's call it ladder BP. Okay, BP is blueprint, of course. And actually now we're going to build the entire ladder using something that is called the construction script. We're not going to put any components here in the beginning. So the construction script, you can see it here on the left under construction script, under functions. This is actually a script, and you see now it's empty and it's purplish, there's nothing here. This script actually is executed before the game even starts, while we're still here navigating in the editor and just working on our game. This script is constantly executing. Why would I need this kind of functionality? This is great for when you're doing procedural stuff that you want to see how they are rendered on the fly before you even start the game, right? Before you press the play button. This is why we have a construction script. So a ladder, a procedural ladder is a perfect thing for that. It's a perfect blueprint or an object for that. Okay, so let's start creating it. First of all, I'm going to create a variable here. We're going to call it number of rungs. And it's going to be of an integer type. And let's compile it for a second so we can have access here to the default value. And let's give it a default value of 10. So this variable, this number, is going to store the number of rungs that we want for the ladder. And according to this number, the ladder is going to be created. And its height is going to be determined. And we also want to give the designer the option, or for ourselves, the option to access this number without every time going inside this blueprint, right? From here, from outside. So to do that, we're going to go here to the variable itself, to the number of rungs here. We're going to click this little eye and open it up. And what this means is that we can now access this variable from outside. You will see it in a second. And here on the category, I always like to give it a name. So let's call this ladder setup. And here, if we go outside and we're just going to pop our blueprint that has nothing for now, pressing F to center, you'll see on the right here, we have this category ladder setup and number of rungs 10. Okay, so from here I can access the integer without going to the blueprint all the time. I can do it outside here from the map itself, which is a great feature. So going back to the construction script, what we want to do now is we want to loop through the number here. So we want to do 10 times, creating each time a section, each time in a different height, right? Relatively to the section below. And this height is going to be the height of the ladder that we're creating is going to be according to the height of the ladder itself. Each time we're going to move it in the same height of the ladder itself. And we want to do it 10 times. How do we go about to do that? We are using a loop. We're going to use a loop. So in order to use a loop, we can take the variable here, number of rungs. We can take it and just drag it to our blueprint. And here I'm going to drag out of this little circle, and I'm going to write loop, for loop. And this is how our loop is set up. From the default, it's connected to the first index, but this is wrong. How loop is working is like this. It's going to run amount of times, and each time it's running, it's going to increase the index. Each time it's executing here, it's going to increase the number, the index number, and it's going to stop when it reaches this number, the last index. So actually, the number that we want to put here is our number of rungs, because we want to continue looping and increasing until we reach the number of rungs, and then we want to stop. Another thing that you might notice here is the first index is the number that it starts. So if I put a 9 here, it's going to do the loop only once, right? Because it's going to do it once, increment by 1, going to reach 10, and it's going to stop. But now it's from 0. And from 0 to 10, we actually have 11 rungs, right? And I want to have 10 rungs, okay? So in order to do that, and I do want to use the number 0, you will see in a second why. I don't want to start from 1, okay? I could, but I'm using the 0, and I'll show you soon why. I want to start from 0, but I want number of rungs to be, instead of 10, I want it to be 9. So all I have to do is just take 1 out of it, okay? So I'm just did a -1 here. So this is going to be from 0 to 9, which is 10. So this is going to run 10 times, okay? This is how we set this up. And what we're going to do is really, really simple. We're going to call the node add static mesh component. This is going to add procedurally, okay, this kind of thing. If I'm going to left click here and going to go to static mesh, it's the same thing. It's just adding this without me clicking, okay, this number of times, right? And when I click on the node, I can actually select which node it's gonna add. So I'm gonna here under static mesh, which mesh it's gonna add, sorry. So here under static mesh, I can click here and type ladder to find my mesh, right? And I can hit compile, and we already see here, you see here, the construction script is already creating the ladder procedurally, but it's, what we're seeing here is that it's going around this loop 10 times, but it's creating everything in the same position. So we are actually looking at 10 ladders all bunched up together. And we want to separate them. We want to put each next one above the other. So how are we going to do that? It's extremely simple. You see here in our add static mesh component, under our relative transform, we can right click on this and split it. And here we have control over each time this loop is going through and it's creating a static mesh. Each time it's doing that, we can tell that static mesh where it's transform, so we can tell it which rotation it's going to be, which scale, and which location. So we care about the location, right? So but we only care about the location, the z location, right? The z location, only the z axis. We only care about that. We wanted to keep on the x and the y the same, but only push it on the z, which is the height. So we're going to right click here again, and we're going to split struct pin here. Okay, and now we're gonna find that location that we want to put the next section at. So how are we going to do that? So we know each time we create a rung, we don't want to change the x and y. We want to keep it the same. We want to keep it centered here in the x and the y. We only want to move it up on the z, on the z axis. So we only want to change this, and we are working in relative transform, which means that this is going to add this number to each axis relative to the actor itself. What it means that it doesn't matter where I put the actor in the world, it will keep the x and the y the same, and the z relative to where the actor is, which means that wherever I put it, it's just going to affect the z. Of that actor. It doesn't matter where it is, okay? So I'm going to keep the x and the y zeroed out, okay? Because I don't want to change them at all. And I'm just going to change the z-axis relative to the actor itself. And how I'm going to do it, and now I'm going to show you, this is the reason I'm using first index 0. I'm going to multiply this number, right, with the height of the ladder itself. And how am I finding the height of the ladder itself? I can go to my ladder, and here I can see approximate size. I have 12, which is on the x, 93, which is on the y, and 45, which is on the z axis. So it's 45 units on the z. So this is what I need to put here, 45, and connect it to the z. So each time this loop is run, okay, it's creating a static mesh of a ladder type. It's putting the relative location of this rung at zero and on the x and the y. So it's always keeping the rungs here in the center. But each rung here is z location is multiplied by the index number and the height of the rung, which gives me here in the first run, it gives me 0, right? So first index is 0, this goes out 0, multiplies by 45, 0, so this is 0, 0, 0. So my first rung is going to be at 0, 0, 0. Second rung, this is going to be 1, right? Because after this is run once, this increments, and now this is 1. 1 times 45 means that I have 0, 0, 45. 0, 0, 45 is around here. So this is where the second one will be. And the third one is going to be 90, and so on and so forth. Okay, so probably now if I just hit compile, we already see this working. And if I'll take this and put it in the world, you see this is already procedurally creating this, and I can now change the number of rungs here to 5, to 25, to whatever I want here. I can even do it like this manually and change the height of my ladder procedurally on the fly before the game is even run, which is a great way to do it. Okay, I can place a ladder like this, take another one and make it like this. Great. And in the following video, I'm going to show you how all the functionality of detecting the actor close to the ladder according to the height is going to change also procedurally. We're going to do everything procedural. So I'll see you in the next part.